This is a black and white photo I took of the Scottish Parliament building in Edinburgh. It's fine. Technically there's nothing wrong with it. The exposure is correct, it's sharp, and the composition works. But it's flat, it's forgettable. It looks like something you'd scroll past without stopping. This is the same photograph, same camera, same moment in time. So what changed? If you've ever stood in front of a stunning piece of architecture, felt the scale of it, the way the light hit the stone, taken what you thought was a strong photograph, and then got home to find it looks nothing like what you experienced, then this video is for you. That gap between what you felt and what ended up on your screen, that's what we're closing today. 3 things made the difference. 1 is what I did before I arrived. 2 is the decisions I made during the capture. And 3 is a processing approach that many photographers have not been taught. But here's what took me years to understand. The technical stuff, the masks, the layers, the plugins, that's actually the easy part. The hard part is knowing what you want before you start. Let me show you what I mean. Before I left home, I'd already scouted this location on Google Maps. Street View showed me where the reflecting pool sat in relation to the building, which facades would work, where I could position my tripod. And when I arrived, I wasn't searching, I was refining. I still had a good look round to see if I'd missed a better option, but then I went to the position I'd identified and assessed the light on the different facades. The weather gave me a flat, featureless sky. Nothing I could do about that in the field, but standing there, I wasn't worried because I already knew what this image was going to become. That's the shift. Most photographers react to what's in front of them. Fine art photography is about deciding what it's going to become. I used a 300-second exposure, a full 5 minutes with ND filters to cut the light. And that 5-minute exposure did 2 things. It smoothed out the reflecting pool to give me that glassy surface, but it also eliminated anyone walking through the frame and the traffic passing in front of the building. They simply disappeared. This is what came out of the camera, a rather flat, grey, washed out image. The water looks dull and the building has no presence. And if you've ever felt disappointed looking at the back of your camera, you know this feeling. You were there, you felt something, and somehow none of it transferred. This was never the photograph, this is just the raw material. And the real work was about to begin. So let me show you how I transform this in post-processing. This is a proper fine art processing workflow, one I learned from studying the work of Julia Anna Gospodaru. It takes time and practice, but once you understand the principles, you can apply them to any image. Here's the overview. 1, sketch the vision. The second thing is basic development and perspective correction. Thirdly, you move on, convert it to black and white with some tonal control. Fourthly, you do some selections and create some luminosity masks. Then number 5, we're painting light and shadow by hand. And then number 6 is to live with the image before you finalize it. Before I touch any sliders, I make a sketch. I open the file in Procreate, which is a sketching app, reduce the opacity so that I can trace over it. Now, that's only because I can't draw. I'm not really tracing the photograph. What I'm doing is tracing my vision for the photograph. Now I know what you're thinking, I can't draw, and as I've said, I can't do it either, and that's why I trace it. You're not trying to create a piece of art, you're just making decisions about where the darkest tones should sit. Where do I want the eye to travel? You're just scribbling over the photo to figure out your destination. And now, if tracing doesn't appeal to you, hold a vision of what you want your image to become very clearly in your head instead. It's a bit harder, but it'll still work. For this image, I knew I had to change that flat sky into something dramatic and dark to contrast the light stone of the building, the reflection anchoring the bottom of the frame, and crucially, I wanted to give the building a 3-dimensional feel. That's the opposite of flat. Different planes of the architecture needed different tones to create that depth and solidity. And here's the thing that nobody tells you. This is where the edit actually happens. Not in Photoshop, but here with a rough sketch or a clear mental image. Everything after this is just execution. If you skip this step, if you just open Photoshop and start moving sliders, you're navigating without a destination. You might end up somewhere interesting, but probably you'll just go around in circles until you're tired. The sketch or the vision gives you a destination, so everything that followed was navigation. I start in Lightroom and I just click Auto Develop, just to give me a baseline, and then move into Photoshop. First I do some perspective correction and I use DxO viewpoint. You kind of do it in Lightroom or Photoshop. I just find that the DxO plugin is quicker and more accurate. And just by the way, you can get 15% off any DxO plugin with the code Richard15. Now, architecture demands those straight verticals, and that small adjustment makes the building feel solid and intentional. And it's the foundation everything else builds on. For the black and white conversion, I use Nik Silver Effects. It gives me a bit more flexibility than Photoshop's black and white adjustment layer, but they both work on the same principles. I can control how each colour in the original translates to grey. The stone of the Parliament building, I can adjust its tone. The blue of that flat sky, I can push it towards black. So every decision here comes back to my sketch. Dark sky, tonal separation between the building's planes, water that feels like a mirror. Next, I go on to create some precise selections. The sky, the building, the foreground, the water, different facades, and I save each one as a separate channel. So let me show you how I do that on one, and I'll save it. So I select the polygonal lasso tool and I zoom in and I click very closely round the area I want to select. Let's do it on this gable end here of the building. Having done that, I go to the select menu and I click save, and I give it a meaningful name so that I'll know what it is when I come back to use it. Here are all the selections I've created. I'll just flick through a few so you can see the different things that I want to work on. After I've done that, I create some luminosity masks. These let you target specific tonal ranges, so you can darken just the highlights or lift just the shadows without affecting the midtones. I use two options. The first one is TK luminosity masks, and this is a free plugin, and to install it in Photoshop you just need to go to the plugins menu, browse the plugins, search for TK luminosity masks and click get. And that's it. Once you've installed that, you'll find it under the plugins menu labeled as TK Loom Mask, and this is how it works. So up the top here you've got a range of highlights and shadows, and then these three underneath are the midtones. And then beneath that you've got things that you can apply to them. So you can apply a curves layer, you can apply brightness and contrast adjustments, hue and saturation adjustments. You can even save them as active layer masks. The other option, and this is the one I tend to use more of, is a Photoshop action to create masks for all the highlights, midtones and shadows. And again, Julia Anagospararu has a free version of this action, and you can download that from a website. I'll leave a link to it in the description. It comes with instructions of how to install it and how to use it. So you just run the action and it creates all these masks for you of highlights, midtones and shadows. And the difference between this and the TK masking option is you get a much broader range. So you'll see for highlights, midtones and shadows, you now get 7 different layers, so a much broader range. So this allows you to be more precise with your work, controlling exactly where light falls in your image. And this is what will bring it to life. And honestly, this is my favorite part of the whole process. So the next thing to do is to create 2 new layers. First of all, I just create one simple layer. And in addition to that, I create a second layer filled with 50% gray and use a soft light blending mode. Now, You're going to paint on that layer, and when you paint with white, it'll lighten the image, and when you paint with black, it'll darken it. So the first thing I do is go back to that blank layer and I add a gradient which will darken the sky from top to bottom, and another at the base to anchor the frame. Now I move on to this 50% grey layer, and I'll paint with my brush. Now I make sure to set my flow very low, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint with light, and I'm going to build up light and shadow very subtly and evenly, just the way a painter would. So let me show you an example. If I work on this part of the building here, I know this is where the light was hitting it. So what I want to do is create a lighter spot by painting with white, and it to darken in the areas where the light didn't hit it. So I start with my flow set to something like 10 or 15%. I paint a bit, and then I move out, reduce the flow so it's less, and paint some more, and you can see how it's creating this lighter area and how that's blending into the darker bits behind. And the beauty of this is I can paint on one part of the building, one of my selections, without affecting any other part of the image or any other part of the building. And this is what creates that three-dimensional depth that I'd planned in the sketch. I'm not editing a photo anymore. I'm painting with light, and that shift in thinking from editor to painter changes everything. Now, one other very important point is that you can work on intersections of selections. For example, if I want to work on this part of the building, I load that selection, but I only want to affect the building, and there's lots of trees in front. So if I now intersect that selection with highlights 1, for example, that should only select the building because the trees in front are much darker, so they're not a highlight. And then if I paint with a white brush, it only affects the building. So when I've gone completely around the image, painting all the areas where I want and getting that three-dimensional depth, I stop and stand back. I'll save my file, I'll probably close Photoshop and leave it for typically 24 hours. I know, after all that work, the first thing you want to do is post it on Instagram, but don't. It's the last thing you want to do. So walk away. And this is the most important step of all. When you've been staring at an image and working on it for hours, you lose perspective. Your eyes adapt to whatever's on the screen, and you can convince yourself that anything looks good. But the next day when you come back with fresh eyes and you look at it again, in fact, what I do is I stand back from the screen, I walk to the other end of my room, and I squint at the screen deliberately to see the overall tonal structure. And if something feels off, I come back and address it until I get to a point where it just holds up, like this one did. Then I export it back into Lightroom. I might make some little adjustments, but that's very much my image finished. So this is where we started. A photograph that's technically correct, properly exposed, sharp, composed, but completely forgettable. And this is where we ended up. Same building, same raw file, same moment in time, but now there's depth. There's mood, there's somewhere for your eye to travel. So that's what it looks like when you close the gap between what you felt standing there and what ends up on the screen. And here's what I want you to take away. The difference isn't Photoshop skill. It isn't the expensive plugins. It's knowing what you want before you start. The sketch, the vision, that's the destination. Get that right, and the rest, it's just navigation. Sketching, luminosity masks, painting with light. I know this isn't beginner stuff, and it took me years to figure this out, and I'm still learning. But if you're at a point where you're technically competent and your images still aren't landing the way you want them to, and that's causing you frustration, I understand it. That's exactly what I help photographers with in my mentoring program. One-to-one work, tailored to where you are and where you want to go. Now, if you'd like to talk to me about whether that might be right for you, I offer a free discovery call. There's no obligation. It's just a conversation about photography, and I'll leave a link in the description. So thanks for watching. I hope this was genuinely useful, not just interesting, but something you can actually apply. If it was, please subscribe. I put out videos like this regularly, mainly focused on the same thing, helping you create photographs that actually mean something. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next one.